Because you're using predictable patterns in order to measure what might be in the future. Prophecy, in order to be prophecy, has to be something which is so irrational, so far in the future, that it would be impossible for a human being ever to say it. For example, I heard that Bill Clinton was in the hospital last week because of something to do with his heart and heart surgery he had a couple years back. Supposing I were to tell you that as a result of his heart surgery, he felt that he needed to go to the land of Israel, and he and Hillary took a trip to Jerusalem. They met some birthright students at the wall. They followed these birthright students to a place in Jerusalem called Mea Sharim, where all the Hasidim live. Bill and Hillary got really excited by Hasidut. They sat at a Shabbat table. They were so inspired by the candles and the singing that Bill Clinton decided to leave politics together with Hillary and to learn together. He at Or Sameach and she at Neve Yerushalayim. And they both became converts to Judaism. And not only did they become converts to Judaism, but Bill is going to be wearing a big furry shtreimel, and Hillary is going to be wearing a wig, and they're going to reside in a little apartment in Mea Sharim, and he's going to dedicate the rest of his life to learning Torah. If I gave a prophecy like that, would that be prophecy? Yeah. I think so. Because everything we see about Bill right now, we don't see anything about his return to Judaism. That would be an interesting prophecy. But I'm going to, or maybe his return to decency, whatever you want to call it. But prophecy has to be even more radical than that. Because prophecy has to be something which has to come true, not in a general way, but in a very specific way to be prophecy. Now let me ask you a question. Why is it dangerous to try to be a prophet? Why is being a prophet a dangerous profession? Number one, credibility. Because if I want to start a religion, for example, and I'm going to say a prophecy, if my prophecy doesn't come true, what does it say about my religion? It's false. Because what is prophecy? How could you know what's going to happen in the future? The only way you can know the future is if you have a connection to the one who controls the future. Who is that? God. So if I give a prophecy and the prophecy does not come true, I've really shot my credibility in the foot. I don't mean to knock any other religions. I don't like to knock other religions, except when I have to. In Christianity, there happens to be one major prophecy that they have in the New Testament. You know what that prophecy is? The Jew will never return to the land of Israel. Now that was a safe prophecy to make in the year 500. You know why? Because in the year 500, where were we? We were exiled to every corner of the earth, and Eretz Yisrael was a wasteland. And to say the Jew is never going to come home was a safe bet. There was only one problem. What happened in 1948? We won the War of Independence against 5 invading Arab countries, and we established a new state of Israel. What did that do to that prophecy? Well, you know what the Vatican did with that prophecy? They said it doesn't mean the Jew won't return to the land of Israel. It says the Jew will never return to Jerusalem. 1967. What happened in 1967? The 6 Days War. The Jordanians started shelling us, and we said, just don't shell us. Don't come in the war. We won't attack you. They didn't listen. They believed Egyptian reports that Tel Aviv was burning. And King Hussein entered the fight. We fought back and we took Jerusalem in 1967. You know what the Vatican did? Jerusalem is an international city. It doesn't belong to the Jews. Guess why they said that? Because their prophecy says the Jew will never return to the land. And the prophecy turned false. Theologically, that could be very dangerous to a religion. So if you want to play the prophecy game, make sure that you have connection with the Almighty who determines the future. Otherwise, your credibility can be seriously hurt. What I want to show you tonight, my friends, is 2 Jewish prophecies. One prophecy we're going to find in one of our texts, dating back 2,300 years. And in one, we're going to find a prophecy in one of our texts dating back approximately 1700 years. And let's see if we can analyze these prophecies in the criteria of prophecy. Is it something that the writer could not have known? And is it something which came true exactly? And let's see if we could do it together. To begin, we have to have a little introduction to Judaism, Jewish history. We know that Abraham had two sons. One son was Yishmael, and one son was Yitzchak, Isaac. Isaac had two children. Their names were Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were pitted in a mortal combat. There was a fight between, our rabbis describe it as two competing ideologies. Jacob, who were the descendants of Yaakov, is the ideology of connection with God, connection with Hashem, bringing Hashem deep into the world. Esau was the ideology of God, you're not there. You don't exist. This world is just a world of chance and happenstance. Yaakov is the ideology of Hashem. Esau is the ideology of coincidence. God doesn't rule. God is not in control. And that's a fight. And it's a battle that we've had with Esau from the beginning. We know that Yaakov competed with Esau over the right to Eretz Yisrael. And he had to get the blessing that we should have Eretz Yisrael. And we see something very interesting. That whenever Yaakov wanted to come into the land of Israel, there was Esau trying to stop him. We know the story that after Yaakov stole the blessings from Esau, so he had to flee for 22 years. On his way back to the land of Israel, there was Esau with 400 soldiers ready to stop him from coming into the land. We see it again later. We see it throughout history. We see that even when Yaakov was to be buried in the land of Israel, in Hebron, Esau tried to stop it. Why is Esau so interested in stopping the Jew from being in the land of Israel? Well, the reason is because Eretz Yisrael isn't just our homeland, it's a holy land. Three major religions had their origin in Eretz Yisrael. You know why? Because there's something in the land of Israel that makes you want to connect with God. You know, the word for Eretz Yisrael, if you translate the word Eretz means land in Hebrew. But if you break up the word into its component parts, it means aniratz, I run. Eretz Yisrael is a place where you want to run. Where do you want to run? The word Yisrael means Yashar El, straight to God. There's an energy there, you want to connect to God. And when the Jew is in the land of Israel, you can bring God into the world in a way that you can't do anywhere else. And when God's in the world, it's a different world. It's no wonder that Esau tried to stop us whenever he could. Now it's interesting. Esau had a son, his name was Eliphaz. Eliphaz had a son, his name was Amalek. Amalek was instilled with a hatred for the Jewish people. And this nation, Amalek, it's a mitzvah actually to wipe them out. We don't know who they are today, so please no one try. But this nation was a nation that attacked the Jewish people whenever we wanted to come into the land of Israel. Interesting. First time we meet Amalek, guess where it is? We came out of Egypt, the Red Sea split, we were marching towards the land of Israel. All of a sudden, this nation called Amalek crossed all the way over from Saudi Arabia, 500 kilometers, to attack us so we couldn't come into the land of Israel. Very interesting. What did they have against us? Were we conquering their territory? Were we invading their water rights? Why did they hate us that they needed to attack, to travel 500 kilometers to attack the Jewish nation? And we had just been liberated from Egypt. We had just split the Red Sea. We were a very, very awesome nation, and they were afraid. But they wanted to stop something. What did they want to stop? They knew when the Jew gets into the land of Israel, God comes down deeper. And when God comes down deeper, guess what? It's not a world of coincidence anymore. It's not a world of chance. It's a world where you have to live up to the responsibility of, how can I be like God? And they wanted to stop that. Guess what mitzvah Amalek hates the most? Guess what mitzvah it is? The mitzvah that it says they hate the most is the mitzvah of circumcision. In fact, the Medrash says that when they would kill the Jews, they killed some Jews in the desert, they took the circumcision and they threw it back up to God and said, God, this is yours. We don't want it. They hated circumcision. And I want you to keep that in mind. Because circumcision, Brit Milah, represents for us the idea that you're not free to be an animal. You have to take the animal part of you and use it in the service of Hashem. You have to control. You have to channel. You can't just do what you want to do. That's what Brit Milah represents. And they said, no, we want to be animals. We want to be free. We don't want a conscience. We want to do whatever we want to do. We hate the Jewish people. We hate Brit Milah. That is Amalek. We meet Amalek another time. We're in the land of Israel for 500 years. We build a temple. It's up about 480 years. The temple is destroyed. We're exiled to Babylonia. The Babylonia is coming to an end. The 70-year exile coming to an end. Babylonia is attacked by Persia. We're about to return to the land. All of a sudden, a man comes on the scene. You know what his name is? Haman. Haman is a direct descendant of the king of Amalek of Agag. And that's how he's introduced to us in the Megillat Esther. Haman ben Hamedasa ben Agagi. There he is. He wants to stop the Jewish people from coming into the land of Israel. What did he have against us? Why did he hate us so much? Well, I guess he hated us so much for the reason Amalek always hates us. The Jew represents godliness. The Jew represents holiness. And we're against the idea that you could just be an animal. You have to live for a higher ideal. So there was Haman ready to stop us. Now let's fast forward in history a little bit more. In the 1880s, a movement began in Europe. A movement called Zionism. And this was a movement whereby after 2,000 years of exile, there was excitement in the ghettos and in the pales and the settlements all through Russia and all through Eastern Europe and into France. And it was a movement to bring the Jew back to the land of Israel. The Zionist movement. In 1919, Lord Balfour of England signed a declaration that Palestine is officially the Jewish homeland. They have a right to live there. After that began a wave of immigration from Europe into Eretz Yisrael, back to the land. An amazing movement after 2,000 years of exile. Guess what happened? 1933, a man emerges on the scene of history in a place called Germany. And all of a sudden he espouses an ideology that we have to destroy the Jewish people. We have to uproot them. We have to kill them wherever they are. Could we say that maybe he wanted to block our return to the land of Israel? The question I want to ask everybody is Germany the modern day Amalek? Can we say that Germany is the descendants of this nation Amalek, who has one mission, which is to destroy the Jewish people? And they hate us because we represent the Almighty. And they don't want God in their lives, because God in your life means I can't do whatever I want to do. Let's see if we can prove that Germany is the modern descendant of this place called, of these people called Amalek. I'm going to show you right now a statement from our rabbis. The Talmud in Tractate Megillah. The Talmud was written down approximately 1,600 years ago. And the Talmud states as follows. Rav Yitzchak said, what is meant by the verse in Psalms, O God, don't grant the desires of the evil man, don't let him expand his wickedness, lest he raise himself above others? Jacob, our forefather, said to God, don't grant the desires of the evil man. This refers to Esav. And don't let him expand his wickedness. This refers to Germania of Edom. For should they go forth, they would destroy the world. Let's stop and pause there for a moment. Concerned. I'm very concerned. Don't grant desires to this evil man, that's Esav, and don't let him expand out. And the Talmud says, what's he talking about? He's talking about a nation called Germania of Edom. Edom is one of the names of Esav. And there's a nation, he said, is called Germania. Should they go forth, they will destroy the world. The name Germania, what does it sound like to you? Germany. Very much like Germany, doesn't it? It sounds very much like Germany. Let me ask you a question, my friends. When did Germany become a nation? It became a nation in 1871. It was unified by Bismarck. When the Talmud was written in the year 400, Germany did not exist. There was no such nation called Germany. There was no such nation called Germania. And yet the Talmud is telling us that if you let this nation Germania go forth, unite, they will destroy the world. Let me ask you a question. What nation in history is responsible for 2 world wars? Germany. Interesting. What did we do to Germany after the war? We split it into the 2, East and West. What does the Talmud say? Don't let this nation called Germania unite, because if you do, they will destroy the world. Rabbi Chanan ben Chanina said, there are 300 crowned princes in Germania of Edom, and 365 chieftains in Rome. And every day one goes out to meet the other, and one of them is killed. And they all have trouble appointing a king again. What does that mean? There are 300 crowned princes in this place called Germania. Well, I have a copy over here from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer, and it says, by the end of the Middle Ages, which had seen Britain and France emerge as unified nations, Germany remained a crazy patchwork of some 300 individual states. That's very interesting. There's no country called Germany. There's only what the Talmud describes, a place called Germania, made of 300 princedoms, 300 kings. You know, it's very strange, by the way, that there should be such a thing. There's never been anything like that in history. A country the size of Texas with 300 princes. And yet the Talmud is describing something that wasn't going to exist for 1,500 years. And tells us exactly how many princes and the name of this place. And not only that, the Talmud tells us, the Talmud says, there are 300 crowned princes in Germany of Edom, 365 chieftains in Rome. Every day one goes out to meet the other, and one of them is killed. You know, if you study in the history of the Middle Ages, it's a constant battle between what 2 empires? Between the Vatican in Rome and what's called the Holy Roman Empire, which was the area that combines Germany. It was a constant battle, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War. What happened in 1939? Who did Hitler sign a treaty with? What country?
Russia.
He signed a treaty with Russia, which he broke. He signed a treaty with another country, which he never broke. Italy. It seems that the Talmud tells us the way to keep this country down is never let them join together and keep them fighting with Italy, with Rome. Because if they're going to join together and if they're going to fight with Rome and they're going to be an ally with Rome, they're going to be very dangerous. Very interesting. The Talmud is giving us a name. It's giving us a description of how many princedoms. It's telling us about the way it's going to interact with Rome, constantly fight. And it's going to tell us what happens if it's unified. And it's going to be very dangerous. How does the Talmud know about this nation Germania that did not exist till 1,500 years later? But my friends, it doesn't stop there. Let's keep going. Let me ask you a question. When you think about the German people, has anyone ever been to Germany? You've been to Germany? You have German?
My
parents are German. So are mine. When you think about the German people, you have to know something about them. They're extremely polite. Very, very polite. They're always using words like bitteschön and dankeschön, please, and thank you. But it's interesting, the Kaiser Wilhelm in 1919, he came to Israel and he came to Jerusalem. Has anybody been to the Jaffa Gate in the Old City? The Jaffa Gate in the Old City, I don't know if you can read that so well, but I'll read it to you. At the Jaffa Gate, you'll notice, is larger than the other gates. The reason is because the Kaiser Wilhelm, when he came, he wanted to ride through the old city sitting on his horse. So they had to expand the Jaffa Gate to make it high enough for his helmet while he's sitting on his horse. So the Jaffa Gate to this day is very high. Now, it's interesting. When he came to Jerusalem, many Jews went out to make a blessing over him. Because there's a special blessing that you say when you see a king. It's a blessing that says, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who has given power and might to flesh and blood." So many Jews actually went out to say the blessing over Kaiser Wilhelm. However, it says that the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, his name was Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, it said he refused to go make the blessing over the Kaiser of Germany. And the reason why, he said, is because he had a tradition from the Vilna Gaon that the German nation is from the seed of Amalek. They exhibit classic symptoms of Amalek: externally polite and friendly, but harboring a deep and bitter hatred of the Jewish people. Externally polite, but hating the Jew on the inside. That is the trait of the German people. I'll tell you, I studied in Germany when I was in college, in Austria, and I could testify to it. They are extremely polite, yet they're capable of an Auschwitz. They're capable of a Holocaust. It's interesting. Our sages describe Amalek and the descendants of Esav by one of the non-kosher animals, the pig. You know, for an animal to be kosher, it needs two signs. It has to have more than one stomach, and it has to have a split hoof. It's interesting. There's only one animal in creation that has a split hoof, but not more than one stomach. Does anyone know what animal that is? The pig. Amalek is compared to the pig. Guess why? The pig says, "Look at me. I'm kosher. Look at me. I have a kosher sign." But if you look inside, he's totally not kosher. He's hypocrisy epitomized. That's what the pig is. Amalek and Esav represent the idea of the chazir, our rabbis say. Externally polite, so nice, talk so sweet, but on the inside, terribly, terribly cruel. You know, I'll just tell you one story. Can I ask everybody in the back to please come this way? I can't speak so loud. If everyone could bring their chairs up this way, I would appreciate it very much. You can bring the pizza with you if you'd like, and eat it while I speak. But I'd like everyone at the table, Arthur, please come this way. Danny? Thank you. If you don't mind, everybody in the back, would you mind just bringing up to these chairs over here? Thank you. Don't be afraid. I don't bite. Only sometimes. Bring the pizza with you, everybody. Pass it around, okay? Bring it here and pass it to people who need pizza, okay? Maybe that's easier. Here, take chairs up here, everybody. It's a little hard for me to speak very loud, and I don't want you to miss this because it's exciting. At least I think it is. Okay. Come, have a seat, guys. Please come a little closer, okay? If you don't mind. Thank you. You know, so we were mentioning that Amalek is compared to the idea of the pig. He looks so kosher on the outside, and yet he's so unkosher on the inside, so externally polite. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld would not make a blessing over the Kaiser because he said he is from this nation Amalek. They are so polite, but they have such a hatred for the Jewish people. Now I want to tell you a story, a true story that's chilling. There was a rabbi who lived in America. His name was Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner had a great yeshiva, still exists, Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn. After the war, in 1945, a man came to see him in America, and he turned to Rav Hutner and he said to Rav Hutner, he said, "Do you recognize me?" And Rav Hutner said, "No." He said, "Take another look at me." Rav Hutner looked at him and said, "The face looks familiar. Who are you?" He said, "Don't you remember? We were students together in the yeshiva in Slobodka." And Rav Hutner says, "Yeah, I recognize you." This man said to Rav Hutner, "I went through Auschwitz, I went through Mauthausen. I went through the concentration camps. I thought about you every day while I was in the camps. Rav Hutner said, why? What do you mean? So he said, do you remember before the war, we used to debate whether or not the Germans were really good people. And you used to say to me, they're phony. They're corrupt. And I used to argue with you, and I said to you, no, we can learn from their politeness. We can learn from their manners. And the example that I used was, if you know German, the Germans will always end a question or end a response with the words nicht wahr. Nicht wahr in German means, isn't it true? For example, if I ask you, how do you get to Main Street? And you'll say to me, well, you make a left over here on 8th Street, you make another left on Jewel Avenue, then you go straight, and you'll make a right, you'll be on Main Street. Isn't that so? Nicht wahr? The Germans always end a response with the words nicht wahr. Isn't it so? Isn't it true? And this man said to Rav Hutner, I argued with you. And I said, we can learn from that. When you say, isn't it so, isn't it true? It means I'm not any better than you. I'm giving you a response, but you also know this information. Nicht wahr. Isn't it true? Isn't it so? And you said back to me, they're phonies. They're saying it on the outside, but inside they're so corrupt. And I said, I didn't believe you until I was in a concentration camp. And a German guard, he gave me a club. And he said, I want you to beat that Jew. And I said, I'm not going to do it. He said, if you don't beat him, I'm going to kill you. So I took the club and I started hitting him very lightly, as light as I could, pretending that I was hitting him hard. And this enraged this German Nazi. He grabbed the club out of my hand and he started beating this Jew and beating him and beating him. And then he turned to me and he said, that's the way to hit a Jew. Nicht wahr? Isn't it so? When I heard those words, isn't it so, nicht wahr, I realized you were right. So polite on the outside, yet so corrupt on the inside. That's what Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld said about the Kaiser in 1919. The Vilna Gaon actually gives a description what the people in this place called Germania look like. He says, you'll know these people by the color of their hair. Their hair, he said, is the color of a certain type of affliction one gets if they speak evil speech. Lashon hara. White. What do the Germans pride themselves on? Their blonde hair. Very interesting. It's interesting, by the way, also, do the Germans call themselves Germany? Or Germania? Is that their name for themselves? What do they call themselves? Deutschland. What do the French call them? Allemand. What do they call them in Russian? What does that mean, Nems? Nazis. What do they call them before the Nazis? What do they call them? That means Nazis, but what do they call them before? Did they call them Germania? There you go. But you know what's very interesting? I found something in Time magazine, which is very fascinating, that the Germans actually, even though they call themselves Deutschland, they have a name for themselves. The name for themselves is as follows. How Hitler would have rebuilt Berlin. It says, can everybody see this okay? The dome of the Great Hall is pictured at the exhibition Myth Germania in Berlin. The exhibition shows pictures, plans, and architectural models of the Great Hall in the north-south axis designed by Hitler's architect Albert Speer during the regime. In one of these spine-chilling what-ifs, what if Hitler and his helpers had been successful in their aggressive strive for world power? A new exhibition in Berlin attempts to answer this question, in part by looking at the devastating architectural consequences Hitler's success would have had for the German capital. In those collaborations with his confident architect of those, Albert Speer, Hitler sought to cast his megalomania in concrete by radically reshaping the city center. His dystopian world capital, Germania, in the Führer's own words, would only be compared with ancient Egypt, Babylon of Rome. Apparently the Germans call themselves Germania. How interesting. That's their name for themselves when they describe their ideal vision of what they want to be. They call themselves Germania. How did the Talmud, going back 1,500 years, know that there would be a place called Germany? Let's read it again. Jacob, our forefather, said to God, don't grant the desires of this evil man. This refers to Esau. And don't let him expand his wickedness. This refers to Germania of Edom. For should they go forth, they would destroy the entire world, my friends. There was no country called Germania 1,500 years ago, as I'm trying to explain to you. If the Talmud describes it, it describes 300 princes. It describes the fact that they're always fighting with Rome. It describes the fact that if they unite, they will destroy the world. We know what they look like. We know their hair color. We know their personality traits. The Talmud tells us they're like the chazir, kosher on the outside, like the pig, yet false on the inside. But how else do we know that they're like? They're actually the descendants of Amalek. How can we prove that they're descendants of Amalek? Amalek's mission was what? To destroy the Jewish people. Well, all we need to do is to take a look at the leader of Germany, Adolf Hitler, and maybe he'll tell us himself if he was actually a descendant of Amalek. I mentioned to you that Amalek hated certain mitzvot that we did. And the mitzvah that he hated the most was what? Brit Milah. Because Brit Milah represents the idea that I cannot be an animal. I have to live by God's word. I have to control myself. At the area of passion, control. At the area of desire, God's word. They hated the mitzvah of Milah. Take a look at what Hitler says. And I quote from Hitler. It is true we are barbarians. Right over here. It is true we are barbarians. It is an honorable title. I free humanity from the shackles of the soul, from the degrading suffering caused by the false vision called conscience and morality. The Jews have inflicted 2 wounds on mankind. Circumcision on the body and conscience on its soul. What mitzvah did Hitler hate? The mitzvah of circumcision. The Jews have inflicted 2 wounds on mankind. Circumcision on its body and conscience on its soul. Why did Hitler hate Brit Milah like that? If not that he was a descendant of Amalek. If Amalek's vision was to wipe out the Jewish people, Hitler was fulfilling that mission. And he hated the Jewish people. You know, I just read recently that Hitler also hated other mitzvahs that we did. Apparently Hitler had a phobia of the moon. Whenever he saw the moon, he was terrified of the moon. What is the mitzvah, or what luminary symbolizes the Jewish people? The moon. It's the way we calculate our months. It represents the idea that you can always change, just like the moon is changing. It's also interesting, Hitler hated one of our holidays. Guess which holiday that was? Not Passover, no. Not Yom Kippur. Purim. He made a decree when they invaded Poland in 1939 that it was forbidden for the Jews to keep Purim. He hated Purim. Because what happened on Purim? We defeated Amalek. We defeated Haman. He hated Purim. He hated Brit Milah. He said the Jewish people has brought conscience to the world. Why did Amalek want to kill us? Because we bring God down to the world. Hitler's telling you exactly who he is. So my friends, what do we see? We have a document written 1,500 years ago called a Talmud. It describes a place called Germania, a place that didn't exist for 1,500 years. We get a description of how many princes are going to be there, 300 to the T. We get a description of what happens when they unite. They'll destroy the world. We get a description of the fight they had with Rome. We get a description of the fact that if they unite with Rome, they're very dangerous. It's interesting, by the way, in World War II, Hitler never broke the treaty with Mussolini. Never. He seemed to understand deep down that I have to be united with Mussolini, with Rome, with Italy. We get a description of their hair color, blonde. We get a description of their personality traits, polite on the outside, yet corrupt on the inside. And Hitler himself tells us that the mitzvah that he hates the most is the mitzvah that Amalek hated the most. Okay. My friends, if I stopped right here, could we walk away tonight and say perhaps Germany is without a doubt Amalek? Do you think we could have? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shachal nidava. If we stop right now, do you think we've seen enough? Could we at least say it's very likely that the Talmud is describing a place which is going to be Germany and a place which is going to be the seat of Amalek? What do you say? Yes? I think we could walk away right now with some evidence. A document 1,500 years ago describing something that doesn't exist and calls it Germania and names it and labels it and describes it perfectly. But I want to take you even deeper. Because Jewish prophecy doesn't stop here. Jewish prophecy is exact. Let's go back now to the time of Purim. What happened during the Purim story? Well, we know that a man called Haman emerged, and Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people. The whole story of Purim is a story of the fight between Haman and Mordechai. And everything that Haman tries to do to us is reversed against him. It's a story that shows that there are no coincidences in the world, that everything is moving and being directed by God behind the scenes. Now let me show you something which is very, very interesting. From the Megillah. The Megillah was written, we should know, by Esther and Mordechai. It was written after the events, going back 2,300 years ago. What's that? I'm sorry, what's the question?
He's asking why there's still Jews living in Germany.
Why are there Jews living in Germany? Most of the Jews living in Germany right now are Jews from the former Soviet Union, or from Israel. Any Jew who originally lived in Germany before 1939 is not there, or very few are. My father, for example, came from Germany in 1938. No Jews, very few Jews remained in Germany. Most of them are actually immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Those are most of the communities right now.
They don't go to the East Germany, they go to the West Germany.
Right, because East Germany was communist until very recently. It was not a higher standard of living. If they want a higher standard of living, they go to West Germany. Okay, let's go back to the Megillat Esther for a moment. I have in front of me over here a copy of one of the last chapters, chapter 9. Actually, it's one of the last chapters of the Megillat Esther. The story goes like this. Haman wanted to kill Mordechai. He wanted Achashverosh to make a decree to wipe out the Jewish people wherever they were, all across the world. It would have been a genocide, because at that point in history, by the way, Achashverosh controlled the entire world. So if he made a decree that the Jews should die, it would affect Jews everywhere. It was never like that in history. For example, during the Holocaust, the Jews in Europe were in danger, but the Jews in America were not. The Jews in Uzbekistan weren't as in much danger as the Jews in Poland and other parts of Russia. But at the time of the Megillat Esther, 2,300 years ago, there was a decree from Achashverosh, because of Haman, to destroy world Jewry everywhere. That's what was at stake. He wanted to utterly obliterate the Jewish people. We know the story works out in a way that instead of Mordechai being hung, Haman is hung together with his 10 sons. At the end of the Megillah, we read about the hanging of the 10 sons. And this is actually what the Megillah looks like. And we put the English in the middle. These are the names of the 10 sons. And it's actually a mitzvah to read them all in one breath. You're supposed to do it very quickly. I can't do it so well. But it says, you have to read all 10 sons in one breath. And it's very interesting, by the way. The Megillah writes it like this, like a column, and then follows it by a column of ve'etz. You know, in the Hebrew language, there's the word et doesn't mean anything. It's a pointer. It points to something. It points to a direct object. So the way it reads, for example, is Parshandata vi'et dalfon, vi'et aspota, vi'et pardota. Always pointing to the next one that comes. But the way Esther and Mordechai wrote it is they wrote a line of the 10 sons of Haman, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and a line of 10 vi'ets, pointers. And this is the only place in the entire Torah, by the way, on the entire writings, where things are written like this. You know, for example, there are other places where things are written. I'll show you. You know, for example, the Torah is written more like this. If you look inside the Torah, it always has the appearance of columns. Upside down. Nope. You know, that's the way the Torah looks. Torah is written, as we know, if you take a look inside, there are always columns like this. But once we get to the Megillat Esther, it does something very radical. It writes a column, like a block, you know, of the names, and then a block of the etz. It's the only place like that in the entire Torah and all the writings, which is very interesting. So keep that in mind for a moment. Now, it's also very fascinating that... Oops. Nope. Okay, someone who's computer savvy is welcome to put this presentation on some sort of, you know, PowerPoint for me, okay? You know, I would love that. What's very fascinating is the storyline. Haman is hung. His 10 sons are hung. And then Achashverosh, the king, turns to his wife. Who was his wife? Esther. Of course, they weren't really married according to Jewish law. It's like she was in a very terrible situation for this time. Almost, you know, like a rape situation. But she was, according to Achashverosh, the queen. Achashverosh turns to Esther and says something very interesting to Esther. He says to Esther as follows. I'm going to read it to you. After the 10 sons are hung, Achashverosh comes to Esther and says, Ma asu u'ma shilasech. Esther, what do you want? V'noten lach, and I'll give it to you. Ma b'kishasech. What's your request? Od v'teas. Anything you want, Esther, will be yours. Now, Achashverosh was the most powerful and wealthiest man in the world. Esther was his wife, who he loved, Jewish woman. If he's asking Esther for anything she wants, if you were Esther, what would you say? What would you respond to the king?
I want to die.
I'd like a diamond. I'd like a diamond mine. I'd like South Africa with with most of the diamonds in the world. I'd like it all. And Achashverosh could have given it. He controlled the entire world. And Esther is asking for something, and Achashverosh says to her, whatever you want, Esther, it's yours. Ma she'elasech, ma b'kishasech od v'te'as, it will be. Listen to what Esther responds. It's underlined. I'm going to read you the Hebrew to show you that I'm a rabbi, that I know Hebrew. I'm really just showing off, okay? But V'tomer Esther, and Esther says, Im al melech tov, if it pleases the king, Yinatin gam machar liYehudim, please allow it to be done tomorrow for the Jews. Asher b'Shushan, who are in the city of Shushan, la'sos kedas hayom, and do like that which was done today. V'yes aseres b'nei Haman yitlu ala eitz, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hung on the tree. I'm going to say that to you again without the song. Achashverosh says to Esther, Esther, whatever you want, it's yours. Esther says back, please, if it pleases the king, let it be tomorrow, like that it was done today, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hung on the tree. What's wrong with what Esther just said? Well, if you look at the few verses before, we see that there are 10 sons already hung. Why is Esther asking that 10 dead men be hung? She can ask for whatever she wants. And she's asking for 10 dead sons to be hung? What is she doing? What does that mean? So let me tell you something. Does everyone see the problem? One more time. 10 sons of Haman, 10 viets, 10 pointers. The next verse in the Megillat Esther, Achashverosh says, Esther, whatever you want, it's yours. And Esther says, if it pleases the king, please allow, like it was done today, let it be done tomorrow, that the 10 sons of Haman be hung al ha'etz, on the wood, on the tree. Why is Esther asking that 10 dead men be hung?
Isn't that the same thing comparison when King Saul went to war against King Og, and when he was about to capture the city, Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, said, make sure you kill all the cattle.
Right. Okay, a little different story. That was a story that went back a few generations. That just shows how Agag survived and how Haman came out of it. But let's just stick with the question. The question over here is, why is Esther asking that 10 dead sons be hung? Now I'll tell you something, everybody. This question has bothered Jewish commentators, rabbis, for the last 2,300 years. Because it makes no sense. Esther is asking for 10 dead men to be hung.
Does she know they're dead?
She knows, sure she knows they're dead.
Maybe she's referring to their sons.
Oh no, these are the sons. Well, these are. Oh, well, no, she's saying that. She says very explicitly, though, Julia. She says the 10 sons of Haman. V'yet aseres b'nei Haman, the 10 sons of Haman, yitlu ala eitz, should be hung on the tree. The already revenge is right there. They're hanging. In fact, the way the Megillah writes it, like a scaffold. It says, like a gallows to show you that they're dead. Don't think they're not dead. It's the only place in the whole Torah where it's written like this. They're already hanging. They're already hanging there. They're hanging there, Ron. What? I'll tell you something. This question is a question which bothered us for 2,300 years. Why is Esther asking that 10 dead men be hung? They're dead. Now, let me ask you a question, everybody. The Megillat Esther is all about God operating behind the scenes.
Maybe it shows to him that this is the only most valuable thing and the most important thing that she could wish for.
That what, the
As
10?
opposed to, no, what I'm trying to say is that since he gave her the opportunity to wish for anything that she wanted,
Yeah.
and she's probably trying to show him that the most valuable thing that she ever wanted was what he already did.
Okay, but why say it in the future? Let it be done tomorrow, like it was done today. The 10 sons of Haman be hung. Why is she mentioning tomorrow? Okay, listen, everybody. In the Megillat Esther, who are the main characters in the Megillat Esther? Achashverosh, good. Esther, who else? Mordechai, good. Who else? Haman, who else? Vashti, good. Who is conspicuously absent in the Megillat Esther? God. God's name is not mentioned once in the entire Megillat Esther. How interesting. One would expect a scroll that's talking about God's miracles to mention God. God's name is not mentioned once in the entire book. What's the reason? The reason is because the whole miracle worked behind the scenes. You have to follow all the threads and put them together and realize this isn't a coincidence. Line them all up. If I roll a dice and it lands on 6 once, I say, okay, I got lucky. It lands on 6 twice. Pretty good. It lands on 6 the third time. What's going on over here? It lands on 6 the fourth time. The guy I'm playing dice with takes out his gun and shoots me because I must be cheating. When things happen over and over and over again, you don't say coincidence. Megillat Esther trains us to see that God is behind the scenes. God says, you're not going to see me, but put all the pieces together and you'll discover me. So therefore, Mordechai and Esther purposely leave the name out to teach us that the whole point of the Megillah is to find God behind the scenes, like we have to do in our lives now, by the way. That's a lesson for us in the Galut, in the exile. Okay. We do have a tradition, however, that there is a hint to God in the Megillah. What's that hint? The hint is as follows. The hint is, excuse me, sir, you're welcome to collect after, okay? But not during the lecture. Okay, thank you. After, gentlemen, after the lecture, we'll be happy to give them. Thank you. Okay. Gentlemen, everyone after the lecture, make sure we leave some. Okay. We have a tradition, however, that there is a hint to God's name. The hint is as follows. Whenever the Megillah mentions Melech Achashverosh means King Achashverosh. When it says Melech, King Achashverosh, we're talking about King Achashverosh. However, when the Megillah says HaMelech, which means the king, we have a tradition that is talking about who? The king. It says over here, the Talmud tells us, Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, every time the Megillah uses the phrase King Achashverosh, it refers to King Achashverosh himself. But every usage of the word king alone has a double meaning, referring both to God and to Achashverosh. HaMelech, oftentimes in the Megillah, can mean God himself. Now let's reread what Esther's request is. Achashverosh comes to her and says, Esther, what do you want and what do you request? It will be. V'tomer Esther, and Esther says, Im al hamelech tov, if it pleases the king. Which king is she talking about? God. If it pleases the king, Yinaten gamachar, please allow it to be tomorrow. Kedas hayom, like that it was done today. V'esa seres b'nei Haman yitul ala eitz, that the 10 sons of Haman should be hanged from the tree. Who is she talking to? Is she talking to Achashverosh, or is she praying to the Almighty? She's praying to God, isn't she? If it pleases the king, please allow, like it was done today, that 10 sons of Haman be hung from the tree. Now I'll tell you again, everybody. The Rokeach, famous rabbi, writing in the year 900, comments and says, it's obvious that Esther is praying for something, but I have absolutely no idea what she is praying for. Now, my friends, we found out what she was praying for. We found out in the year 1946 exactly what she was praying for. In the year 1946, after the defeat of the Nazis, a trial took place in a city called Nuremberg in Germany. It was a trial conducted by a joint coalition of the Allies, the Americans, the French, the British, and the Russians, at which time they tried the major Nazi war criminals. It's a picture of what it looked like. The Allies stood behind, uniformed. These are some of the 24 defendants from the trial. At that trial, it turned out to be a testimony for what the Nazis did and the evil that they perpetrated. Is that the right word? The evil that they put forth. Documents were shown. It's a picture of the German generals signing the unconditional surrender. Take a look at their faces. Take a look at how their uniforms look. So polite and well dressed on the outside. Take a look at what Eisenhower had the German people do to march by corpses from the concentration camps so the people in the town should understand what was going on behind those barbed wires. Look at the way they're dressed. Ties and jackets and canes. So polite, so externally kosher. Walking past American soldiers and dead Jews. They brought to light at Nuremberg the dangers of mass obedience, and they discredited the alibi that I was just following orders. In fact, they executed at the time 2 of the generals who said they were only just following orders. Following orders, obedience to evil was not going to be a defense. The trial was concluded in June 1946. In June 1946, the trial was concluded. At the trial, it was determined that 11 of the major Nazi criminals would hang. Unfortunately, 2 hours before the execution, the Reich Chancellor of Germany, Hermann Göring, committed suicide. He had had a cyanide capsule in his cell the whole time, and he was able to keep it there. The New York Times quotes, "Göring ends life by poison, 10 others hanged in Nuremberg. Prison for Nazi war crimes. Doomed men on gallows pray for Germany." Life magazine ran a picture of the defendants, showed a picture of Hermann Göring dead. That was Hermann Göring when he was Reich Chancellor. That's what he looked like in Nuremberg, and that was a picture of him dead. People wanted to make sure that he was really dead. Life magazine had to show the faces. Now, there was a problem at the trial. The problem was this: how should they execute these Nazi war criminals? The question was, do you shoot them by firing squad? Because that's a soldier's death. Or do you hang them as war criminals, as common criminals? And the world did not know what to do. The verdict was given in June, and for a number of months, nothing was done. And the world said they're not going to really execute them. It's not going to happen. And there was a question, and if we do execute them, we should hang them. Excuse me, we should shoot them, not hang them. And the Germans were begging to be shot, not to be hung. Because hanging is the way you execute a common criminal. Let's go back to the Megillah for a moment. The scroll is written in a very interesting way, as I pointed out. The only place in our entire Torah where there's a scaffold. You know what a scaffold is? Like one on top of the other. And another line of vi'ets, which are like pointers. But there's something also very unusual in the way Esther and Mordechai chose to write the names of Haman. And let me show you what those are. We have a tradition that the letters in any of our holy works have to be written the same size. If we were to take all of the letters in our Torah and in our writings and our prophets, we have over 600,000 letters. There are 305,000 letters alone in the Torah. I know that because I stayed up one night counting them. And if we add the prophets and the writings, there are at least another 275,000. So we have perhaps 600,000 letters of equal size in our writings. However, listen carefully. There are 23 letters out of those 600,000 which are either larger are smaller. Interesting. In the names of Haman's sons, we happen to have 4 of them right there. In the name Parashandatsa, we have a little, can everybody see it? We circled it. A little tough. In the name of Parmashata, we have a small shin. In the name of Vaizota, we have a small yud. And next to it we have a large vav. Now again, 600,000 letters in our Torah and writings. Only 23, I believe, are of different size. And 4 of them happen to be within the space of 10 words. Significant? We think so. My friends, for 2,300 years, we had no idea why Esther, when she wrote the Megillah, chose to write a small letter in Parshat Data, a small shin, a small yud, and a large vav. We had absolutely no idea for 2,300 years. When did we discover it? We discovered it very, very recently. Stay with me, everybody. Oh, here we go. Let me show you what we discovered. You know, we know that a letter in the Hebrew alphabet is not only a letter, it also represents a number. The Tuf is a number 400. Shin is 300, and Zion is 7. If we go back to the Megillat Esther again, what do we see? We see a Tuf, 400, a Shin, 300, and a Zion, which is 7. You add it together, it is 707. Now it's interesting. The year 1946 came out to be the year 5,707. The year that these Nazis were hung was the year 5,707. Now think with me for a moment, everybody. How many times in Jewish history has 707, the year 707, come about? They were hung in the year 5,707. Esther wrote the Megillah. It was probably the year 2,707. How do we know Esther wasn't talking about 3,707 or 4,707? How do we know she meant 5,707, which would correspond to 1946, the year of the trial at Nuremberg? How do we know that? Well, you know how we know that? Think for a moment, everybody. Adam was created in year 1. So that was year 1. After that, 707 years later was the first time 707 appears. 1,000 years later, it's 1,707, twice. 1,000 years later, it's 2,707, 3 times. 1,000 years later, it's 3,707, 4 times. 1,000 years later, it's 4,407, 5 times. 1,000 years later, it's what?
6 times the vast.
It's the 6th time, which is 5,707. 707 has occurred how many times? 707, 1,707, 2,707, 3,707, 4,707, 5,707. 707 has occurred 6 times. What number, what letter in the Hebrew alphabet represents the number 6? The Vav. How interesting. Esther not only gives us the year, Tuf Shin Zion 707, she tells us what millennium. the big Vav. The sixth time 707 is going to occur, which turns out to be when? In the year 1946. How interesting. When does the Jewish year begin, by the way? My pleasure. When does the year begin? What month? Tishrei. June was when the execution was scheduled, correct? But it didn't happen until what date? October 16th, which happened to be the last day of Rosh Hashanah, Hoshana Rabbah, which meant that what? What year would it have been had they been executed in June? It would have been 5706. But of course they were executed October 16th, 5707, because I guess Esther was telling us it would be 5707. And not only that, the day happened to be Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day when judgment is executed on the world. Now, it's interesting, by the way, I guess the Goyim, it's interesting, my friends, how many men were supposed to have been hung? 11. What did Göring do the night before? He ended his life by poison. He committed suicide. You know why he did that? Because how many did Esther ask to be hung? 10 or 11. She asked for 10, so one had to oblige. One had to get out of the picture. That was Göring. How interesting it is, my friends. How many children did Haman have? No! 11! What happened to the 11th? Committed suicide. Haman had one daughter. And the only thing we know about this daughter is that at one point in the Megillat Esther, so Mordechai is sitting on the horse, and Haman is leading Mordechai. It was a reversal. Haman's daughter is watching from above. She's looking down. She assumes that it's her father, Haman, sitting on the horse, and Mordechai is leading him. It says she takes the pail of, you know what? And she pours it out the window, and it lands straight on her father's head. Her father looks up. She looks down. She sees what she did. Says she jumped out the window and committed suicide.
So she killed her father?
She embarrassed her father, but because she embarrassed her father, she committed suicide. He had 11 children. One committed suicide. And I'll tell you something, and this is a little bit, don't take it too seriously. There's a book out called The Sexual Deviances of the Third Reich, and Hermann Göring was a transvestite. He wore women's clothing underneath his uniform. It's a very strange person. Interesting. Esther asks for 10. 10 are killed. But how did we know? How did we know this? How did we know to look back at the Megillah and say, we got it? How did we know that? Where's my Megillah? How did we know it? How did we know that, well, this is the date? The year 5707. And these Ve'etz is like another column of 10 men. How do we know it was talking about these 10 Nazis at Nuremberg? And that's what Esther meant when she said, if it pleases the king, please allow, like it was done today, to be done tomorrow. The 10 men who need to be hung will be hung. Because the world's not going to want to hang them and they need to be hung. How did we know that that's what the Megillah was talking about? What clued us in order to know that? I'm going to show you what clued us in. The last of these Nazis to be hung was a vicious, vicious anti-Semite. And his name was Julius Streicher. Julius Streicher was the editor of an anti-Semitic newspaper called the Der Stürmer. And in Der Stürmer, he incited a nation against the Jews. He pictured the Jews, like in this picture, for example, as monkeys behind a bar. He pictured the Jews, for example, in this picture, as you see, Jews drawing blood out of the dead necks of Christians. He aroused anti-Semitism. Die Juden sind unsere Unglück. The Jews are our unfortune. And he was hung. A terrible, vicious anti-Semite. And you know how he was captured, by the way? He was captured by an American Jewish major who was he gave out pictures after the war in 1945. They were going around looking for the war criminals. This Jewish major, his name was Billet. He went to a farm just to rest, and he sees a guy on the farm with a beard, and he says to him, look, what were your politics during the war? Were you a Nazi? The man said, I'm just a simple painter. And so this American Jewish major says, that's so funny. You look just like Julius Streicher. And you know what he says? How'd you know it was me? And he said, the Jewish major was like, he goes, okay, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say, okay, and he made the arrest. That's what they caught him. But Julius Streicher was one of the most vicious anti-Semites. And let's look at what Julius Streicher said. I'm going to read to you from an article in Newsweek, 1946. Newsweek, October 28, 1946, Foreign Affairs page 46. It calls it the 13 Steps. Frantic prison officials determined that no other victim should escape them. At once shackled the 10 surviving convicts in their cells. Then in 90 minutes, in the early hours of October 16th, they followed each other to the gallows. Former Foreign Minister Yochanan von Ribbentrop, pale and disheveled, but unflinching, inheriting Göring's #1 spot, flanked by American MPs and a chaplain, he walked the 35 yards from the cell block to the brightly lighted gymnasium at 1:11 a.m. Blinded by the glare, he stood inside the door, facing the 3 black wooden scaffolds erected on a floor where GIs had played basketball only 4 days before. The manacles were removed and his hands bound behind him, and a black leather thong. Then Ribbentrop walked steadily to the foot of the 13 steps. He gave his name firmly and mounted the 8-foot platform where Major Sergeant John C. Woods, veteran executioner of 347 men in 15 years, awaited him. What was the name of the American executioner, by the way? John C. Woods. What did Esther ask for, by the way? That the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the 8s. What does 8s mean in Hebrew? Wood. How interesting that the executioner's name was Woods. It's a joke. I don't take it too seriously. That's just a joke. He gave his name firmly. And he mounted the platform. Okay. He mounted the platform where Major John C. Woods, veteran executioner, 35 men, waited him. He stood on the trap beneath the rope suspended from a heavy wooden beam overhead, while an army belt was pulled tightly around his ankles. God protect Germany. God have mercy on my soul, he said in a ringing voice, and then asked, may I say something else? An American officer nodded. My last wish is that Germany realize its unity, and an understanding be reached between East and West. I wish peace to the world. He stared straightly ahead, lips tightly set, as the black hood dropped over his head. Then came the noose, and the trap banged open at 1:16. While the stiffening body still hung behind the screen that hid the gallows' dark interior, 3 knocks sounded at the gymnasium door. And Field Marshal William Keitel, clothes neatly pressed and shoes shined, entered. After him the guards, with precise, ruthless efficiency, brought in the other ones to deliver their last speeches and die. Let's read now about the last of these Nazis to be hung. The last of these Nazis to be hung was Julius Streicher. Only Julius Streicher went without dignity. He had to be pushed across the floor, wild-eyed and screaming. Hail Hitler! Mounting the steps, he cried out, and now I go to God. He's going to be in for a big surprise. He's going to hell. He stared at the witnesses facing the gallows and shouted, Purim, 1946! And Newsweek comments, Purim is a Jewish feast. Who opened our eyes to what Esther had encoded 2,300 years ago? No other than one of Haman's descendants, Julius Streicher. This is an enactment of the hanging of the 10 sons of Haman. And when he said it, we saw it. Tuf Shin Zion, 5707. There was the date encoded. There was Esther's request. Please, Hashem, allow these 10 Amalekim to be hung. You know, my friends, I tried to show you tonight something which I think is very extraordinary. We saw 2 prophecies. We saw a prophecy about a nation called Germania that, if let unite, will destroy the world. Why is it a prophecy? It's a prophecy because when it was written down 1,500 years ago, there was no such place called Germania. And yet we did see a description of how many princes lived there, or will live there, 300. We see a description of what type of hair they will have, blonde. We see a description of their personalities, arrogance. We see the fact that when they unite, they're dangerous and will destroy the world. We see a description of how they will always fight with Rome. And when they stop fighting, they'll be very dangerous. Our rabbis were writing this when there was no such place called Germany. Where did they get the information from? Unless they were in contact with the one who controls history. And then we see a Megillah of Esther, a document written 2,300 years ago. And Esther encodes a date. And the date is the exact date when the 10 sons of Haman in Nazi guise are hung at Nuremberg. And her words, where she says, please allow tomorrow, like was done today, becomes totally clear. How could Esther have encoded that date, the exact date, unless she herself, as a prophetess, which she was in contact with the one who controls the flow of history? My friends, these are 2 examples of Jewish prophecy. Specific, exact testimony that there is an Almighty, and our prophets had communication with Him. And the documents that we possess, called the Torah and the writings, are documents which were written through the hand and the mouth of God. And my friends, you and I sit here as Jews, and this is our heritage. This belongs to us. This belongs to you. It belongs to me. This is what we have. We have something so real, so beautiful, so alive. Something so divine. How fortunate we are. How fortunate all of you are. How fortunate I am. Thank you so much for listening to me, everybody. I've enjoyed speaking to you. You're wonderful. Thank you.